I also want to thank you as well for providing such a wonderful venue for us to have our conversation tonight. Although I'm going to be doing most of the talking, I like to think of this as a conversation, so hopefully that'll be a major takeaway from today's discussion about Harlem. I also want to thank Professor Angelina Russo of the Center of Creative and Cultural Research for inviting me to be with you this evening. Thank you, Angelina. Also, I would like to thank Fotis Kapitopoulos of the Bites of the Big Apple Cultural Management Tour, which brings professionals like you to New York to learn about what we're going to talk about today. Just briefly, my fiance and I, just as an aside, we came to the museum yesterday. We took the tour. It is a wonderful, wonderful experience. This is a tremendous asset to both Canberra as well as to Australia, and I encourage all of you to come here if you haven't done so already. Today, I'm going to talk about the importance of Harlem to New York City, the importance of arts and culture in Harlem, and most important, how we, the New York City Department of City Planning, the Harlem Arts and Culture community, residents, stakeholders, elected officials, and public and private agencies try to incentivize, support, and develop arts and culture along 125th Street, Harlem's Main Street. I'm sure that this discussion will reveal opportunities to replicate many aspects of our success. We are seeing the transformation of culture as a critical component to an area's economy, identity, and quality of life. Culture is also key to tourism. For example, in New York City, almost half of the 54 million visitors to the city last year came for culture. As many cultural tourists as the entire population of Australia, which is about 23 million people. Arts and culture also make our neighborhoods great places to live and work, and at the local level, it's the driver of employment. Cultural groups also enhance quality of life in ways that go beyond their mission. Now in Harlem, the impact of culture has been and continues to be profound. Local artists and cultural organizations ensure that Harlem remains a destination for cultural consumers from around the corner and from around the world. The special 125th Street Arts, Entertainment, and Zoning Strategy, which I'm going to share with you today, with its innovative arts bonus, is one way that we're building on Harlem's extraordinary history as a cultural center. Now, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to give the presentation from the aisle, sort of like a talk show host. I'm going to try that for a while, see how that goes. If it goes well, then I'll be basically taking questions from the middle aisle as well. So first of all, can everybody see the screen? And can everybody hear me? Yes. Most excellent. Okay. So people have been coming to New York City for decades. And whether they come by dirigible, as was the case in the early 1930s, or whether they come by steamship, or come by commercial jet, or maybe they're beamed down from another place, there are several things that they are compelled to see. One is the Lower Manhattan skyline, the Empire State Building, our great bridges, which includes the Brooklyn Bridge. I took this at sunrise. I'm so happy with myself. The Empire State Building. It's not the tallest building in the city, but it is the most iconic. Times Square. I must admit that when New Year's is rung in, you guys beat us because of the time difference. However, in America, Times Square is the place where we gather to bring in the new year. The new World Trade Center site, Ground Zero, we have Freedom Tower, which is located to the right, that gleaming glass building on the right. And the former World Trade Center footprint is where we have a memorial for those that were lost on September 11th, 2001. And Harlem. Harlem is an international icon. When I mention Harlem, you know that I'm talking about Harlem, USA, Harlem, New York City. I'm not talking about Harlem in the Netherlands or any other place. Harlem is truly a special place, a very special part of my life, and it's a pleasure to talk about Harlem with you this evening. So this is what we're going to talk about. This is our compass for our conversation tonight. I want to share with you some selected images. Certain things come to mind when people talk about Harlem. You may agree with them or not, but just to give you an idea of some of the things that people think about when Harlem is mentioned. Then we're going to drill down to 125th Street. What we heard, what did we see, and what did we do? And then we'll talk about the arts and entertainment zoning strategy, try to address some of the things that we've heard, try to incentivize culture, arts, and similar development along 125th Street. So certain images come to mind. I love this image. This is a couple taken during the Harlem Renaissance in the mid to late 1920s, a very short period of time. However, many sort of think of this as a glory period in Harlem. A lot of literature, music, culture came out of that time. Hollywood images. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good. But for many, it basically frames their idea of what Harlem is. Brownstones, the brick and mortar culture of Harlem. We have one row of brownstones, and here's a second row of brownstones. This is what brings people to New York City and also brings people to Harlem. Harlem is known for arts and culture, not just its visual arts, but also the performing arts. Music, dance, theater. Public art can be found throughout Harlem. This is a mural that's outside one of the government office buildings, occupies the entire wall facing the office building. But you also find public art on the sides of residential buildings. This is a 5-story residential building where the entire facade has been treated as a mural. Next to it is open space that people will sit, reflect, and pause as they look at the mural. And 125th Street. When people come to New York City, they come to Harlem. When they come to Harlem, they come to 125th Street. The Apollo Theater is the iconic cultural venue on 125th Street. And at the time that we did this work, it was the only cultural venue on 125th Street. Now, even though it's the only venue, it's still a very special place. And if there's any doubt as to the special power of 125th Street and the Apollo Theater, all we have to do is think about the passing of Michael Jackson. When he died, people organically came to 125th Street and to the Apollo Theater. There was no notice, there was no advertising, there was no mention in the media. People just felt compelled to come to 125th Street. They gathered there. They shut the street down for 3 days. That's the power of 125th Street and the Apollo Theater. So, 125th Street is Harlem's main street. It's the street's front porch, gathering place, portal, a place of solace and calm. It's also a place of activity and industry. Okay? So, I just want to go back one, if I can. Right. So, the area that we looked at is only 24 blocks. 125th Street runs down the middle, but we have some residential blocks on the north and the south of 125th Street, so we have to take a look at that as well. The interesting thing about 125th Street is that everybody seemed to have a sense of proprietorship about the street. Everybody was telling us what should be done, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Everybody knew about the street or thought they knew about the street. So we were dealing with a very informed audience in working with 125th Street. So this was our objectives for 125th Street. One, 125th Street already exists. So, and it was already going through a little bit of a revitalization. So we wanted to enhance and maintain that and support that. We did not want to sort of stop that in any way. Second, we wanted to provide a balanced strategy to identify areas where new development could occur, but also protect development or protect areas where the development is pretty much secured in place, such as the brownstones that we saw in the earlier slide. We did not want to incentivize development there. And thirdly, to support 125th Street role as a premier arts and entertainment corridor, as well as a regional business district. Now, it's interesting that we're having this conversation in the Museum for Australian Democracy, because if there's anything that required a participatory democratic approach or a big tent approach to getting everybody's comments and ideas, this project was that. We had a public outreach process that extended nearly 5 years. We interacted with everybody from the community, local organizations, cultural organizations, the elected officials, local businesses, property owners, and community residents to get an idea as to what should happen on 125th Street. Community participation was very, very important. And as I said before, we had a number of workshops and a number of meetings to get ideas as to what should happen on 125th Street. But I want to direct your attention to the bottom, the cultural work session. Because one of the things that we wanted to do was we wanted to try to make 125th Street as an arts and entertainment corridor. But we're urban planners, you know? So this is something that we generally don't do. So what we did was we reached out to curators of museums, historic exhibits throughout the United States to get an idea as to what was needed to make these types of venues work and operate efficiently and effectively, and what was needed to develop new similar venues, especially along Harlem's 125th Street. Spreading the word was very, very important, and this is something that I feel very passionate about. One of the things that we found out in Harlem, and this is something that you probably see in your work as well, is that the world is becoming more diverse, cities are becoming more diverse, and sometimes when you're trying to advance a particular type of project or program, you have to think about how to tell the message. And that sometimes means telling the message in a language other than English. All of the outreach that we did for 125th Street was bilingual. All the flyers announcing the meetings were bilingual. As I was presenting, making presentations, and I made over 350 presentations over a 5-year period, they were done bilingually. So it's very important to note as we move forward that as cities become more diverse, or target populations become more diverse, we have to think about how to tell the message. After the metric, after the analysis has been done, how do you tell the message? What is your audience? So this is what we heard. In terms of character and identity, maintain the unique character of the street. People are coming there, don't mess with that. We've heard that people were somewhat amenable to increase in density, increase in development opportunity, and also the types of activities that would keep the street alive during the nighttime hours. The street would shut down at night. In terms of art, entertainment, and culture, anything that would increase visitors but also benefits residents as well. We also heard that jobs, employment is a very important issue in Harlem, that whatever is generated or created should create job opportunities for area youth as well as area residents. And also, since the street functions as a major transportation corridor, and since we're trying to incentivize new development, how can we ensure that the street will not be congested, that the street can operate in an efficient manner? We had some challenges. Along the street, we had the single-story retail, we had some vacant buildings, and we had, at night, these solid roll-down gates that would come down and would create shadows on the sidewalk. It would be very dark, very foreboding, and you really didn't want to walk along the street. And also basically conveyed a message or a feeling that you were not welcome on the street, and that's something that we were trying to change. So, this is a wonderful photograph. This was taken in 1943. You can see the Apollo Theater in the upper left-hand corner, but there are two other theaters, the Victory Theater, the Victoria Theater, and the Harlem Theater. A lot of activity happening on the carriageway, a lot of activity happening on the sidewalk, commercial offices above the ground floor, and this is what we use as a template, as a model in terms of thinking about what could happen on 125th Street. So we believe that coming up with a strategy, a three-pronged strategy, and building on the legacy of the street, that we can basically enhance the street and sort of push it in a manner where it could be an arts and entertainment corridor as well as a regional business district. So why is this important? Well, we know that people were coming up by tour bus, but they were not getting off the bus because there's nothing for them to get off the bus for. You only had the Apollo Theater and that was it. A gospel visitor is someone who comes to listen to a service in a black church in Harlem. They would come to listen to a mass or some sort of religious sort of service. They would go there and then they would leave because there was no place for them to go after the services were done. We knew that at that time over 800,000 people were coming seeking culture, and cultural tourists are the ones that will spend more money, They will spend more time in a particular neighborhood looking for that cultural experience, whether they're going to a Chinatown, whether they're going to a black neighborhood or any ethnic neighborhood. We knew that that was the type of visitor that we wanted to bring to Harlem. In terms of the economic benefit, increased consumer spending, increased employment opportunities, and also new places for residents as well as visitors to enjoy. So the trick is, how do we get them off the bus? Okay, so this was a three-pronged strategy, which I'm going to walk you through. Strategy one was strengthening the critical mass of venues. And how do we do that? Well, first of all, you identify the existing cluster of major venues. And as you can see, there weren't a whole lot of them. And that was one of the things that we're trying to do, try to incentivize the creation of more cultural and arts venues. Then, as planners, we identify where new venues could be developed. That could be a vacant lot, a vacant building, or perhaps a building that could be repurposed for arts and cultural uses. When you support your existing venues and build new venues, there's an opportunity for people to come to 125th Street and move north or south, as shown by the arrows, to venues that are off the street, or for those that go to venues off of 125th Street, let's say Aaron Davis Hall in the upper left-hand corner, they can come to 125th Street, sort of stitch the two together to have a symbiotic relationship between what's happening on 125th Street, what we wanted to see happen on 125th Street, and the neighborhood around it. Very, very important to support existing institutions. The city spent an awful lot of money in terms of capital investment for cultural institutions that are things like boilers, windows, infrastructure, aging infrastructure. The city spent a lot of money on that. You can see that in the first bullet. Also, programmatic monies were also given by the city to support existing Harlem arts institutions, as well as $85 million in grants from the state. So as we're thinking about where new venues could go, we recognize that existing venues, those that have been there for the longest time, needed support as well. So that was the first thing that we did out of the box. Now, this is a cultural venue. This is a Dwyer. And what's interesting about this is that this is a mixed-use building where you have residential use on the upper floors. You have ground floor retail. But in the basement, you have this wonderful cultural space, which we supported, the city supported. And what's interesting about this is that the space is configured in a way where you can configure it as gallery space or entertainment space. So that way you don't have fixed chairs. You can move it out, you can move the interior, reorganize the interior depending on what you want to do. But the takeaway from this is that we found it necessary to support an existing cultural institution. Okay? The second strategy, so we talked about critical mass and supporting existing institutions. The second was promoting identity. Identity is very, very important because of this sense of place, that when you've arrived in a place such as Harlem, you know that you've arrived in a place that's really significant and really unique. What we were missing at that time was we didn't have an information resource. So if you arrived in Harlem, if you were one of those few that got off the bus, you didn't know where to go. Awareness of activities. You got off the bus. What do I do? There was no way to know what to do. And second, for those that were a little more intrepid, there was no clear walking paths. There was no way to basically navigate through the community to see the wonderful gems and treasures that the community had to offer. So how do we do that? One, we create signs, and now we have smartphone apps. We didn't have apps when we did this. But now with smartphones, you can create a wayfinding system that will help people navigate through the community. Now, I worked on a project about 14 years ago. There was a streetscape enhancement of Malcolm X Boulevard, which is in Harlem, and it had the same thing. And we felt that by creating a self-guided walking tour map, this would be a way of helping people navigate through the community. The image that you see on your left is a poster-sized graphic. It shows Malcolm X Boulevard. That's in the red, sort of on the oblique angle. And Malcolm X Boulevard, which was also known as Lenox Avenue, had a number of jazz clubs. Many of you probably heard of the Cotton Club. There were at least 100 clubs on Lenox Avenue in the 20s and 30s. And that's why we called it Lenox Shadows. We wanted to pay homage to all the old clubs jazz club speakeasies that were located on Lenox Avenue at that time. Our intention was to design this and put this in bus stop shelters and in the subways, as well as hand these out as sort of foldable maps. We ran out of funding, but our intentions were pure. And again, we use this as a template in thinking about 125th Street, having some sort of a self-guided instrument to help people navigate through the neighborhood. A destination center, very, very important. When people get off the bus, they have a place to go to where they can find out what's happening in the neighborhood. And also, I'm a big fan of an international festival or annual festival. Barcelona, Berkeley, we have the Montreux Jazz Festival. These types of things draw people into the neighborhood. Also, neighborhood residents can take advantage of this. We now have a Harlem Jazz Festival as a result of our work here. So we're very, very happy about that. And then the third thing, the third strategy, we talked about critical mass. We talked about, identity, promoting identity, is fostering complementary uses. And what's a complementary use? A complementary use is something that complements the performance venues that we're trying to incentivize and create. A restaurant, a bar, a club, a place that people can go to before the show. I'll meet you at Joe's restaurant before the show. A place where people can go to after the show. I'll meet you, let's go to Joe's restaurant when the show is done. We didn't have any of that on 125th Street. We just had the Apollo Theater. So complementary uses complement the performance venues, and it's equally important. So it's not just about developing or coming up with a framework to develop new theaters and performance places, but also the types of activities that support and enhance performance venues. So we took a look at other cities. We looked at Chicago, we looked at Philadelphia, we looked at Boston, we looked at Miami. And the other cities are in the purple. We looked at banks, and then we looked at, because banks were being built in large number at that time, and we found that in other places, along major central business district or business corridors or commercial corridors, only 2% of the land area were banks. But along 125th Street, 14% of the land area are banks. So 125th Street had more banks than the other places. But in terms of eating and drinking establishments, the other places, 125th Street rather had 11% or 8%, but the other places had 47%. So again, the need to generate and develop complementary uses. The restaurants and the bars and the clubs get the people off the bus. They get the people to stay and spend money. They create the jobs. So this is where the planners come in. Zoning, many of you probably know what zoning is, but zoning provides a framework for development. It tells you how land can be developed. It tells you the size of the buildings that you can build. It tells you whether land can be used for residential, commercial, or manufacturing use. So through zoning, we can shape and sculpt what could happen. It's a very powerful tool that urban planners use. So we created an entertainment use requirement. This is a requirement. It's, and for buildings that are at least 60,000 square feet, 5% of the floor area, roughly 3,000 square feet, which is not much, has to be set aside for qualifying entertainment-related use. That would guarantee that with the large development that we were incentivizing on 125th Street, at least a portion of that would be developed as a qualifying entertainment use. And so what is an entertainment use? This was a list that we did in consultation with the community. This list came out of 4 years of public conversation and town hall meetings with the community. So if a developer wants to build a 60,000 square foot building, 5% has to be set aside as an art gallery or a rehearsal studio or a museum or a restaurant or a bar. That would ensure that the eating and drinking establishments that were missing on 125th Street would come when the new development would occur. We also thought about what happens along the public realm, what happens along the sidewalk. Remember when we saw the solid roll-down gates in the early image? Well, we said they got to go. So there's a transparency requirement where the solid roll down gates get removed, and we put up the see-through gates or the mesh gates, and that does two things. One, it creates an environment that's less foreboding and more welcoming. We trust you, okay? And second, at night, it allows the interior light to penetrate onto the sidewalk, so the sidewalk is less dark at night. Also, you can do window shopping at night. You can be walking along, and you see something, oh, that's a very nice coat. I think I'm going to come back when the store is open, I'm going to buy it. As a result of this, this is now a New York City citywide regulation. All stores cannot have solid roll-down gates. But I'll tell you an aside. The solid roll-down gates, some of them had artwork on them. There's a local artist that put artwork on the gates to beautify the gates. His name is Franco the Great. So we had to find a way to not only take the gates down, but find a place where they could be permanently stored and displayed. Sometimes it's interesting, you create one problem when you solve another. So the gates are being stored, and eventually they'll be displayed permanently, so that artwork will not be lost. Now, we love banks. Banks are great. However, you probably notice that with the ground floor banks, you have the ATM lobby, and when the bank is closed, that's all dead space. There's nothing in there. Okay, and we saw that as an opportunity for a greater range of uses. So what we did through zoning, we said, okay, the banks can occupy a portion of the ground floor. You can see that little green on the first floor. And that does two things. It allows for the ground floor to be used for a variety of uses, not for an entire ATM lobby. And it creates a new market on the second floor. So you put most of the banking operation on the second floor, and you have more variety of uses on your ground floor. And this is also true with hotel lobbies as well. We have a small hotel lobby on the first floor. You put the admissions desk on the second floor, and that also revitalizes the second floors. Now, interestingly enough, we saw the Apollo Theater, okay? Has a marquee sign. We're trying to incentivize arts and culture venues. Marquee signs are very important in denoting where they are. However, the existing zoning laws do not allow for them. So we say, okay, if you have an entertainment venue, you can have a marquee sign. Marquee signs are very important. So when you put everything together, now this is a building that's 60,000 square feet, a floor area. We see the small green, which shows the lobby. So we know that the lobby's on the first floor, the banking operations on the second floor. We see the first floor has a variety of uses there. It could be anything. It could be another commercial use or what have you. We know, denoting from the small marquee sign, that purple thing, that was my attempt at making a marquee sign, that there's an entertainment use there. And so that way we know that 3,000 square feet has been set aside for that. And we were fantastic. We were great. We said, this is cool. We're done. Thank you very much. The community said, not quite. I run a nonprofit dance studio. I can't afford to move into a new building that's going to charge market rent. And there's absolutely no way that a developer is going to set aside space for me. You know, you're trying to incentivize arts, entertainment, and culture. What about me? Okay? So through a series of conversations that lasted about 2 years, we came up with the arts bonus. And the arts bonus is basically to enable a nonprofit, and that's the thing, a nonprofit arts or entertainment organization to take advantage of space created. The developer would get a floor area bonus. And we had 5 categories of nonprofit art uses: art galleries, historic exhibits, museums, theaters, and performance venues. If you were a nonprofit and you operated one of those 5, you could qualify for the bonus. And this is the way the bonus works. Okay? So if you could build a building, let's say in the white. Okay? So everything in the white you could build at what we say as of right. However, if you want the additional floor area, and this is the carrot and the stick, if you want the additional floor area, then you have to provide space for a nonprofit arts or entertainment organization. And that way, if a developer wants to maximize his development opportunity, he has to provide space for a nonprofit. And we thought that was great. So we were slapping ourselves on the back and said, okay, are you happy? You got yourself an arts bonus for a nonprofit. And then we had a number of people come to us and said, no, thank you, but that's still not enough. It's iterative. It's very interesting. That's why it took nearly 6 years to do this. We had performance spaces that are located below grade. There are certain performance spaces like jazz clubs that you go downstairs to attend. Under zoning in New York City, a space below grade is not eligible for any type of a bonus. So they said, well, why not? And we thought about it and said, yeah, that makes sense. So if you operate a performance venue and you're a nonprofit, and that's the thing, if you're a nonprofit, then you qualify for the bonus. There are other things too that it cannot be an afterthought. It has to be clear span space, cannot have any columns or beams, and we had minimum floor-to-floor requirements in the cellar. But if you want to put something in the cellar or basement, you qualify for the bonus. And then we had the rappers come to us, and they said, well, I do a spoken word kind of a thing, or I quote poetry. I run a nonprofit. Can a developer provide space for me? And we said, sure, you can do that. That's the third bullet. The second bullet, we had someone come to us and say, I don't have a performance troupe, but I provide space for rehearsals, for dancers to rehearse, for musicians to rehearse. Rehearsal space in New York City, and it's probably true in Australia, is very, very expensive to rent rehearsal space. So we said if you're a nonprofit and you provide rehearsal space, you qualify for the bonus as well. So this was a truly, totally iterative, interactive, collaborative process between us, the arts community, the Harlem community, property owners, elected officials, to try to get something happening here. As a result of that, we got honored by the American Planning Association for our work on 125th Street. 125th Street was named as a great place in America in 2007 as a result of our work on 125th Street, and we're very, very proud of that. So this is some before and after. This was before. Again, we talked about complementary uses. This was before the zoning was put in, and this is after. This is huge because it means that people have a place to go to either before or after a show. It also adds to the local economy. This is another shot taken in 2008. This is before, and this is after. Again, a number of places where people can go. There are some restaurants in there and some shops in there. Again, provides jobs and provides places for people to go. One of the things that we saw with the new development was that we saw things happening organically. This is a restaurant row. You can see Red Rooster, you can see Harlem Gourmet, and Chez Lucien. These restaurants opened in response to some of the new stuff that was happening in Harlem as a result of the 125th Street Arts and Zoning Plan. Additionally, and just recently, within the last year or so, we're beginning to see the development of new performance venues. Black box theaters, smaller theaters are coming online now, again, because of the arts bonus and of the zoning framework for 125th Street. So, in closing, I'll say that 125th Street is being seen in a new light. If you go to 125th Street, perhaps in maybe 3 or 4 years from now, you're going to see, arts and entertainment venues. You'll see restaurants where you can go and you can get a cup of coffee or have a meal, and you'll see the street in a totally different way than what has been seen before. So I encourage you, as an homage to Duke Ellington, take the A train. Come uptown. It's a wonderful place. If you have any questions, this is the web address. It talks about everything we did on 125th Street. Again, we started in 2003. We actually finished in 2011. Actually, we did this for 8 years. After a while, it just sort of runs together. But it's actually an 8-year process. That tells you everything that we've done. Again, after a long period of abandonment and disinvestment, we're starting to see things happen on the street. With that, thanks for listening, and I'll be more than happy to listen to your comments and questions. Thank you.